Namaskaram. So let's talk about chapter 6 of the book Karma. Topic of chapter 6 is Karma Yoga. Let's talk about Sutra first. Sutra is in losing awareness of self is the trap of karma. The hunter becomes the hunted, the architect becomes the bonded labor, the creator becomes creation. A spider trapped in a web of its own making is a tragedy. First point is the crippled fox and the generous lion. It happened on a certain day, a man was seized by a spiritual thirst. In those days, when you were spiritually thirsty, you went to the forest. Today, of course, that would be difficult given that there isn't much forest around. So, this man went deep into a nearby forest and found a tree under which he sat cross legged and began intoning the sacred syllabi Om. Om. Now you can do Om for only so long. After that, the stomach has its own Om, which asserts itself periodically. Each time his stomach growled, the man would go to town for a meal. He would then come back and resume his austerities. One day he returned after his meal and sat down on a rock. He was about to resume his chanting when he noticed a fox. It had lost both his forelegs but was still well fed and healthy. This struck the man as distinctly odd. In a jungle governed by the law of the survival of the fittest, it was strange to find a disabled but healthy animal. How had this fox managed to survive? The man looked at it with some surprise. After a while, he resumed his practice. That evening, while meditating, he heard the growl of a lion. He promptly forgot his arm and clambered up a tree. A lion came by with a large chunk of meat in its mouth. To the man's amazement, the lion walked up to the crippled fox, dropped it in front of him, and walked away. The fox began tucking into his dinner. The man looked on in disbelief. The same practice went on day after day. The man could not believe his eyes. A crippled fox being fed by a generous lion, this was a miracle. This has to be a message from God, he thought. What is God trying to tell me? He struggled with that question for a while and then it dawned on him. When even a crippled fox was being fed in the jungle by a generous lion, why should he keep running to town in search of food? Surely God wanted him to trust he would be provided for and wanted him to focus on what really counted, his spiritual practices. So the man changed his strategy. For the next 3 days, he kept up his own practice without stirring from his spot. By the 4th day, he was considerably weakened. By the 5th day, he could barely stay conscious. By the 7th day, he was gasping for life, caught in the throes of death. A yogi happened to be passing this way. Hearing these noises, he found the man and asked, "What happened to you? Why are you in this condition?" "Because a divine message came to me, I obeyed it, and see my plight," groaned the man. "What divine message?" And so the man related to the yogi the entire story of the crippled fox and the generous lion. "So tell me, yogi," gasped the man, "was this a divine message or not?" The yogi said, "Yes, of course this was a divine message. But why did you choose to imitate a crippled fox rather than a generous lion?" And this is exactly what we have done to our understanding of karma. We have always had a choice between inclusive action and paralyzed violation, between intelligent dynamism and pathetic fatalism. Why do we so often choose the latter? When we say our life is our karma, it means that our life is of our making. What incredible freedom this spells, and yet what devious ways we have found to absolve ourselves of that responsibility. The moment we absolve ourselves of responsibility, our life resembles that of the crippled fox rather than of a generous lion. In most cultures of the world, people have been told that God determines the course of their life. They must therefore look up to God. But in the East, we said there is nothing to look up to in a round planet that is spinning what is up anyway. Your karma was created by you and is knowingly or unknowingly being crafted, knowingly or unknowingly being created by you every moment of your life. Karma is therefore an invitation to look within, not upward. Once you understand that you are 100% responsible for your life, you will naturally choose to live consciously rather than unconsciously. An unconscious life seems to be easy because you do not have to do anything other than live by your patterns and compulsions. But an unconscious life will not unfold the way you want it to. It is at the mercy of the caprices of your compulsions. A conscious life, on the other hand, will unfold in the best possible way for you. Most people live in states of great inner tumult because they believe a God up there or others around them are responsible for their lives. However, the moment you see my ability to respond is limitless, things settle. You have now shifted the source of creation from heaven to within. Now it does not matter whether you have confirmed ticket to heaven. Once you know the source of life is throbbing within you, those tickets are quite irrelevant. The significance of karma is that it means that none of your identities derived from beliefs, ideologies, religions and system of morality are absolute. All of them are capable of constant evolution. Indeed, of all the crimes that human beings have committed against one another and every other creature, the idea of heaven is the worst of all, because the assumption is that life happens at its best elsewhere, not here and now. Karma means that you are capable of being at your best and doing your best in this very lifetime. It implies a movement towards your ultimate well-being. It means you are capable of being in heaven in the lap of the divine within yourself right now. Now you may ask, if karma means taking complete responsibility, what is grace? What is the role of the divine in our lives? Is karma a denial of God? No, it is not. Let us look at this closely. What do we mean when we use the word divine? By the divine, we mean the source of creation. Where is this source? Within you. Only because you are life, or you capable of wondering about the source of life. So the question is, are you going to rest content knowing only the skin, flesh or bone that make up every physical form, that make up your physical form, or are you going to seek the very source of creation within you? If you know only the physical, you will live in a particular way. If you know the mental and emotional dimension of your energy, you will live in a deeper life. But if you touch the very source of life, you are available to grace. Your entire life becomes divine. Let's talk about first point, walking alone. Not first point, I think second point, walking alone. The one thing every seeker needs to remember is that the inner journey can only be undertaken alone. Once this realization dawns, it marks the birth of spirituality. This realization is sometimes scary for those who are used to living in groups, to making collective life decisions. Yes, you can walk together in the outside world, but it is the inner world everybody walks alone. It happened. A yogi was walking through the forest. He was suddenly accosted by a highway robber. This was a notorious robber with a reputation for looting and murder. He was about to strike the yogi when the yogi asked, "Why are you accumulating these terrible karmas?" "What for?" "I have to support my family," said the robber. "I am responsible for my family, my children and my old parents. I have to kill you." "If you are doing this for their sake," said the yogi, "it is also time you found out if somebody is willing to carry the burden of your karma. Please go home and find out. Tie me up in this tree so I cannot escape. Just go home and find out for yourself who is willing to carry your karma." So the highway robber went home. He said to his family, "I support you by killing people and looting them daily. Will you support me by sharing my karma?" His father said, "Nothing doing. I am your old father. It is your business to take care of me. How you take care of me is your karma." He went to his mother. She said the same thing. He went to his wife and children. They said the same thing. "It is your duty to take care of us. How you take care of us is your problem. Why would we share the karma of a murderer?" Disillusioned, the man came to the yogi and fell at his feet. You were right. Everyone is willing to partake of the rewards of my karma, but no one is willing to share responsibility for the adverse consequences of my action. Karma cannot be distributed democratically. While there is a dimension of collective karma or kula vedana, there is also a allotted karma that every person has to work out. Whether it is work out with meditation or love, with awareness or ecstasy, does not matter. The realm of individual responsibility exists and it cannot be evaded. It is true that separateness or individuality is fundamentally a myth. However, as long as a person is invested in this myth, the karmic bondage remains. The greater the investment, the greater the karmic bondage. In moments of great devotion, however, when the level of investment is low and an individual's personality has almost dissolved, it is possible for the well of karma to be lifted. It is said that when saints like Jesus and Guru Nanak is the founder of Sikhism, Buddhist masters and innumerable yogis walked the earth, people were cured of their ailment just by touching their garment. The enlightened master can certainly create the possibility for a person's karma to dissolve faster. What would happen in a hundred's lifetime could be worked out in a few minutes. The presence of these masters could therefore have created an opportunity for these afflicted people's karmas to dissolve more swiftly. It is also possible on rare occasion for a master to take on an individual karma, but most of the time the karmic allotment, even if you put on fast forward, still has to be worked out by the individual. As long as you consider yourself to be an individual, you cannot pass the buck. Your karmas are your own. Third point is the way out of the karmic web. As we have seen earlier, the yogic system tells us that every human being is composed of 5 bodies: the physical bodies, the mental body, the energy body, the etheric body and the bliss body. Karma is primarily imprinted on the first 3 levels. If we address the first 3 levels, we can attain a state of extraordinary freedom from the karmic labyrinth. Many people speak of freedom but have no clue that they are getting more and more deeply entrapped in their own karmic maze. Despite being gifted with phenomenal levels of intelligence, they have forgotten the way out of this self-created web. In losing awareness of self is the trap of karma. The hunter becomes the hunted, the architect becomes the bonded laborer, the creator becomes the creation, a spider becomes the creation. A spider trapped in a web of its own making is a tragedy. It happened. On a sunny afternoon, Sankaran Pillai decided to go fishing. He took a case of beer to drink because it was a particularly hot day. As he waited to get lucky, he started sipping beer. Fishing is a patience game, but most people do not know how to wait. As Sankaran Pillai waited, he consumed can after can of beer. He consumed can after can of beer. The afternoon wore on. The hot sun and the beer made him drowsy. All of a sudden, a big fish bit the bait and tugged at his fishing line. A drowsy Sankaran Pillai, who was sitting at the very edge of the river bank, slipped and fell over into the water. A small boy and his father were passing by. The little boy turned to his father and said, "Daddy, look, is the man fishing the fish or the fish manning the man? Look at your own life and answer this question as honestly as you can. Are you running your own life or is it running you? You have pursued so much of your well-being, your home, your business, your car, your spouse, your child, your club membership, but look back now and see, have you caught the fish or has the fish caught you? It is time to stop the charade. There is only one way out of the spider's web, and it is the age-old journey from unawareness to awareness, from compulsion to consciousness. The journey known to the greatest yogis and mystics all over the world, the journey back to who you are. The yogic tradition has long had a term for this, Karma Yoga. Let's talk about the 5th point, Karma Yoga. What exactly is Karma Yoga? It is the process of using your karma as a process to liberate yourself. The logic of Karma Yoga is simple. Every single activity you engage in can be used as a process of entanglement or as a process of liberation. If your activity is used as a process of entanglement, it is karma. If you use the same activity as a process of liberation, it is karma yoga. However, the misconceptions about karma yoga are many. A great many people use the term freely and erroneously. Erroneously. It is time to clear the many falsities that have distorted human understanding and that have created over the years more confusion than clarity, more heat than light. So let's start with the first misconception. Many believe that karma yoga means unrelenting action. This is untrue. Karma yoga is not about being busy. It is not about being in constant doer mode. It is instead about engaging in kind of activity that frees you, about performing the kind of action that leads you to your own higher nature towards your freedom. There is also a widespread premise that karma yoga means social service. That is a karma yogi is a do-gooder. This is yet another myth. Mere service is not karma yoga. Karma yoga has nothing to do with what type of action you perform, but rather how you do it. Even good deeds can be performed compulsively rather than consciously. This can lead to entanglement rather than liberation. It is the how that makes the difference. It is the volition that counts. If action creates bondages, it is karma. If action creates freedom, it is karma yoga. If you perform action miserably, it is karma. If you perform action joyfully and effortlessly, it is karma yoga. It happened. On a certain day, 3 men were working on a site. A passerby came and asked the first man, "What are you doing?" The man looked up and said, "Hey, are you blind? Can't you see? I am cutting stone." The passerby went to the second man and asked the same question. "What do you think I am doing?" growled the second man. "I am trying to earn my living. I need to fill my belly." The passerby went to the third man and asked again, "What are you doing here?" The man stood up in great joy. "I am building a glorious temple." All 3 men were doing the same work. For the first man, his work was simply cutting stone. For the second, his work was simply a means to eke out a livelihood. For the third, his work was an opportunity to create something beautiful that he cared for deeply. The how is the pivotal issue. Every single act in your life can be like this. It is not the content of your life that matters, it is the context of your life that does. So becoming a karma yogi does not mean you have to give up whatever you are doing right now. It means you do with wholehearted involvement and in the process help create a more joyful world wherever you go. The problem with today's world is that we have created rigid ideas of right and wrong. When our minds are so full of hierarchy, it is impossible to do wholeheartedly involved in any action. When my daughter was 12 years of age, she came to me a little troubled. I gave her just one guidance: never look up to anyone, never look down to anyone. If people practice this simple sadhana, they would see everything just the way it is. If you look up to someone, you will exaggerate their positive quality. If you look down to someone, you will exaggerate their negative quality. But if you simply look, not for something, but just look, you will see things just as they are. Now your ability to navigate your way through life is greatly enhanced. Have you ever walked on a level surface expecting to find a step before you? The very expectation of a step makes you lose your balances. This is what it means to walk through life in a make-believe landscape that bears no relation to reality. Even if you are on flat land, you are out of balance. The moment you say something is superior and something is inferior, an entire mechanism of like and dislike, attachment and aversion is set in motion. But when you see things with a certain inner equipoise, you will find an enhancement in every aspect of your life, whether it is managing a corporation or managing your family. This brings us to the next fallacy about karma yoga. Karma yoga is usually interpreted as doing one's duty. This again is utterly false. Now, this may sound outrageous, but let me say it. There should be no such thing as duty in the world. Duty is tyranny. The very idea was concocted by people with vested interests. Think about it. Every idea of duty comes from someone with an expectation. The rulers tell you what your duties should be towards them. The ruled tell the rulers what their duties should be towards them. Parents keep trying to remind children about their filial obligations. Children keep trying to remind parents about their parental obligations. Husbands want wives to remember their spousal duties, and wives want husbands to remember theirs. There is nothing as unbearable as someone doing something for you because they believe it is their duty. The sanctimony of it can make it intolerable. If you are too dutiful, you will die of its burden, and people around you will die of boredom. If you have love for something, you do it. If you have no love, it is better to simply desist from action. Doing something miserably or self-righteously is not the contribution to life. When your activity is such suffering, you will create much suffering around you. If you can work joyfully, you should do it 24 hours of the day. If you cannot, it is better you stop. The planet is full of miserable people working hard and manufacturing more misery in the process, both for themselves and for everyone else. The idea of duty comes from the ethical and moral systems we have created in case our humanity fails. These are fallback systems, but as a guru, I want every individual's humanity to be active every moment of their lives rather than work on a fallback system that mimics humanity but is actually a phony substitute. If all the 7.8 billion people on this planet in 2021 grew pretty industrious, all of a sudden this planet would be finished in the next 20 years. Thankfully, 50% of the people are lazy, and it is that 50% who have saved the world. This is an unfortunate state of affairs. It should have been the intelligent and the active who are saving the world rather than the other way around. But regrettably, too many miserable duty adherents are actually wreaking the world by being busy all the time. Karma Yoga is not a holier than thou adherence to duty. Instead, it is about making your entire life an offering. Only when action is performed like this does karma create no bondage. The world is full of people consciously trying to awaken love or spirituality in others in some way or the other. Most often, this is done with great attachment to a self image of being a compassionate or noble person. With such attachment, action is entangling. Only if there is a natural sense of offering can karma be elevated for the doer. So the inevitable question is, if duty is irrelevant, does it mean you can do whatever you want? Yes, it does. But there is a caveat. Whatever you do, there is a consequence. If you are willing to joyfully take the consequence of your action, go right ahead. But if you are going to cry over things when they turn unpleasant, it is best you regulate the action and act with some sensitivity and foresight. Sixth point is approaches to Karma Yoga: awareness and abandon. Karma can be said in two ways, either by acting with awareness or by acting with total abandon. If you can do it with both, you are liberated. These are the two approaches to Karma Yoga, but without these two, everything that you do is an accumulation of karma. Abandon is one of the most difficult qualities to find in the world today. The level of inhibition that people live with is truly amazing. It is responsible for several of the diseases, both physical and psychological, we see around us. I often ask people, how many of you have grown up in families where you heard your parents laughing many times a day? Most of the time people are dead serious because they are burdened by this dreadful duty of having to bring up their children right. Now, when large number of people grew up like this, exposed all the time to fear, anxiety and tension, they naturally grow up inhibited. It may not be spelled out for them, but children pick up the fine print very easily, that it is not decent to laugh, to cry, to dance. In fact, what they imbibe is that it is not right to be alive. As adults, they believe that apart from going to an office, working all day, collecting their paybacks, coming home, reproducing, and struggling with their children, nothing else is appropriate. Unfortunately, inhibitions these inhibitions do not allow people to simply sit still. What no one realizes is that sitting still is one of life's greatest pleasures. If you can sit absolutely still, you will see that just breathing and being alive is the most extraordinary thing in the world. My schedule is a hectic one, but if I get the chance to shut my door and do nothing, that is the most wonderful time in my life. I have no need to read, watch television, or communicate with anyone, or to have even a single thought in my mind. The phenomena of life is much greater than the phenomena of thought and emotion. When you truly experience life, your world of thoughts and emotion begin to seem puny and inconsequential. Just being alive is the greatest gift of all. Even for one moment, if you are in deep embrace with creation, the source of creation is not far away. It becomes a living experience for you. But right now, you are not involved with creation. You are enamored of your own limited self manufactured creation, which is just a psychological projection. All your miseries, your tensions arise from this small make believe world. How then are we meant to live? It is quite simple. Whether you walk or dance, work or play, cook or sing, just do it with total attention and awareness, or else do it with total abandon. Both way you are closer to creation. But if neither awareness nor abandon is part of your life, you are stuck in your own creation. This is a tragic way to live. When a creation of phenomenal exuberance and grandeur is around you, it is calamitous to live in your own cocoon of preoccupation. And the irony is, it is not even a cocoon entirely of your own making. It is molded by 10 other people's opinion of you. Most people do not even know who they are, but they have opinions about everything else. You are allowing their opinions to dictate the nature of your very existence. So, what exactly do we mean by awareness? First, let us remind that mental alertness is not awareness. Awareness has nothing to do with the logical mind, nor it is what is commonly being referred to as mindfulness. Awareness emerges from the deepest layer of the human being. This is called chitta, or consciousness without content. Once you are in touch with the deepest layer, awareness happens effortlessly. It happened. Two priests were standing with a signboard that read, "The end is near, turn around before it is too late." A speeding car came along. The driver saw the signboard. The sign, struck his head out of the window, yelled, "Leave us alone, you religious nuts," and sped on. He turned the corner. The priests heard the hideous screech of tires and a huge crash. One of the priests turned to the other and said, "Maybe we should just have the signboard read, bridge is out." The problem with spirituality is that wrong signs have been shown to you far too long. People have talked too much of mental awareness. There is no such thing. Mental alertness is not awareness. Mental alertness will help enhance your ability to survive in this world. The mind is a useful faculty of discernment, essential for survival, but of no existential consequence. Awareness is a far deeper dimension. It is not something you do, it is not an action, it is a state of being. It is the way you are. Awareness is inclusiveness, a way of embracing this entire existence. You can set the right condition for it to happen, but you cannot do it. If you bring the physical, mental, and energy bodies into alignment, there will be room for awareness to blossom. Once that blossoming becomes experiential for you, you explode into the oneness of existence. This is yoga, the ultimate union. What about abandon? What does it mean? It means that your involvement has become so intense that you are willing to abandon yourself. Most people think the world refers to abandoning someone or something, but this is about abandoning yourself. You are willing to just give up everything that you consider to be yourself. Now, abandon can certainly happen by simply sitting still, but it is not easy. It takes great awareness to do this in a state of inaction. On the other hand, in intense states of activity, when you are running, dancing, or playing a game, You can give yourself up with total abandon. In such moments, there is a disconnect between your past and you. When you are completely lost or immersed in any activity, the influence of your past karma is no longer upon you. Many sportspersons and artists know this state of immersion, but the frustration is that they are unable to sustain it. Immersive activity can give you a taste of freedom, but it cannot last. Yoga is the science of sustaining that experience. Many believe that a state of restlessness is a prerequisite for action. This is absolutely untrue. The paradox is that the basis of activity is in restfulness. Action that is born of restlessness is life taking, not life giving. It destroys a human being in the process. If action is performed in such a way that it is not about yourself anymore, you will see that your ability to work is almost limitless. You can be active almost 24 hours a day without exhaustion. This is the remarkable thing about Karma Yoga. Now, you may ask, what does all this have to do with being spiritual? This brings us to yet another fallacy. Being spiritual does not mean sitting under a tree half asleep. Being spiritual is not a disability, it is an empowerment. It does not mean limiting your sphere of activity, it means enhancing it. A spiritual person can cook, clean, walk, work, manage a business or a nation, do anything they want and still be spiritual. For such a person, their very life breath is a spiritual process. This could happen if their awareness rises beyond a certain level, if their love transcends certain limitations, if their physicality is very intense, or if the vibrancy of their energies goes beyond a certain level. A spiritual person is one who has found action in inaction and inaction in action. Spirituality is about dynamism and stillness cohabiting within you to give you a taste of living death all the time. Okay, so let's talk about important sadhana related to this chapter. A selective involvement is the basis of bondage and entanglement. Here is a simple sadhana towards your liberation. From this moment onward, be consciously involved with everything around you. The food you eat, the water you drink, the earth you walk upon, the air you breathe, the people around you. If you find this difficult, think of a person whose presence evokes the noblest and sweetest emotion within you. It could be a person living or dead. It could be Jesus or Buddha or anyone else you value most highly in your life. Then try looking upon everyone and everything around you with the same gaze. If this is hard to sustain, give yourself a hourly reminder on your cell phone. A simple chant or mantra or tune could remind you of this. This will help establish you in the practice. Be equally involved with everything without any distinction. Put away all hierarchies. If God comes before you, the same involvement. If a frog comes before you, the same involvement. I am not talking of that frog that turns into a prince upon a kiss, just a frog. Okay, this is a story from a novel. It may seem challenging at the start, but once you manage it, you will see that in just 24 hours you are capable of becoming an unimaginably blissful human being. Let's talk about 7th point, renouncing the fruit of one's action. When I was once asked what my mission in life was, I said nothing, I am just fooling around. My interlocutor was shocked. Fooling around? Was I being flippant? What did I mean? Around, and yet it is true. All my yoga programs, talks, conferences and outreach project does not mean a thing to me. Then why am I doing my damnedest to make sure people learn yoga and human well-being? You may ask. When I say it does not mean a thing to me, I am not saying it is useless. I know it is useful. I know this is what humanity needs right now, but personally it does not mean anything to me. At the same time, I will do it as if my life depends on it, and if it costs me my life, I will still do it. My involvement is on at full throttle all the time. Does this sound paradoxical? Actually, it is not. The problem is just that most people cannot do something unless they are personally invested in it. This is the most important cause in the world, they think. Or God has chosen me to do this work. People are always looking for their mission in life. What they never realize is that this is the way you build your karma. God has ordained no one. It is people themselves who build a false sense of self importance by claiming that their work is divinely ordained. If they learn to plunge into something that does not mean anything to them with absolute involvement, they would find their karma disentangling in no time. The basis of karma yoga is to be involved in the process, not the product. Whether you approach your karma through awareness or abandon, the point is to immerse oneself in the journey and not be anxious about the destination. Start by looking at a practical example. Let us say someone is an accountant. The fact that they go to an office and count numbers does not in itself entangle them, but other reasons might impel them to work. The prestige of working in a particular firm, the financial benefits, the lifestyle it affords them, the social access it allows them. So gradually they might find they are no longer going to work because they love to count numbers, but because of the fruit of their actions. Of course, everyone deserves to be paid, to eat well, and to live well. But the question is this: if all those benefits were not there, would we still work with the same intensity and involvement? You do not need to be a scriptural scholar to understand this. Just observe yourself. You will see that whenever you perform an action without expectation, your experience of life will be qualitatively different from the times when you perform it with expectation. A good example is to consider the times when you have played a game that you enjoyed. You plunged yourself into the game with passion and involvement, and of course, you played to win. But you were not devastated if you lost. It is because you enjoyed the process that you were willing to play again. If you are very happy playing the game, the result does not really matter. If you are able to carry this awareness into every aspect of your life, your experience of life will be drastically altered. Above all, a game is won only when you play it well, not because you desire to win. Since it is not easy for everyone to cultivate enough awareness to drop the fruit of their action, every culture in the world has emphasized the importance of love. When you have a deep sense of love towards somebody, it becomes much easier to drop the consequence of your action. In this regard, women are definitely better karma yogis than men. Think of all the women who have worked quietly, tirelessly, anonymously down the centuries without any prospect of financial reward or fame. Many of them worked full time to look after their families, to make sure everyone has fed and clothed and loved, without thinking for a moment about what was in it for them. Unfortunately, we have devalued the contribution of these generations of unsung women. Our current education has the effect of creating endless greed, unbridled want. Those who act without expectation of reward would be considered losers in the society we have created for ourselves. Our idea of progress is to want to be like someone else or else to compete to outdo others. This madness is the curse of our modern world. Karma Yoga reminds us that action is never a problem, it is the expectation of the fruit of the action that causes suffering. If you simply enjoy what you do and work at it wholeheartedly, there is no question of suffering at all. You would work joyfully and your ability to work would be hugely enhanced. Only a human being who is utterly blissful would be able to recommend renouncing the fruit of one's action. When you are trying to attain happiness by hoping for a certain result from your activity, outside situation will determine whether you are joyful or miserable. This is why I am not impressed by those who endlessly quote the words of Krishna or Jesus or parrot Rama or the Buddha. Repeating a scriptural truth without an inner experience of it is a futile exercise. It will not transform your life in any way. But a simple reversal of approach to your life can make all the difference. If you saw your life as an expression of your happiness rather than an pursuit of it, you would find you have made a significant paradigm shift. You would effortlessly immerse yourself in whatever you are doing without any expectation for the pure joy of the activity. Eighth point is the rule or to serve. Human beings have no choice but to act. That is the nature of our lives. But the two alternatives before us are just these. Do we want to rule or do we want to serve? Now, I do not mean perform service in some self conscious, holier than thou way. That is more an intensification of the ego than anything else. When I say serve, I mean an act of immersion, not conquest. Every human being wants to have an impact upon the world, but how you live this impact is the moot point. Do you think you are incapable of being a despot? Most people want to rule the world. It is just that because they are half-hearted that they end up ruling only their household. They may not have the capacity, the intensity, the one-pointed focus that is necessary to rule the world, but secretly they wish they could. What makes a tyrant different is that their self-image is powerful. They might believe so strongly that they are going to rule the world that sometimes it almost comes true. This is something many human beings have yet to discover for themselves. That if they create a continuous mental focus toward a particular self-image, it will in fact come true. There is, however, another way to create. It does not entail asking for anything or even thinking about what needs to happen. Here, things just happen as they are needed. No forethoughts, no plotting or scheming is required here. Once you choose this approach, all you need to do is to act with tremendous intensity without wavering for an instant in your focus and determination. Then one day you will reach a point where no action is needed. You are capable of acting, but you are not compelled to. You choose to engage with life, but you are no longer entangled by it. This kind of action is possible for everyone, but before you arrive at this state, some fired up action is required. People who have never been on fire will never know the coolness of water. People who have just lived their lives in a lukewarm, half-hearted, sedate manner can never reach a point of transformation. Those who have never known intense action will never be able to move into inaction. Their inaction will simply be lethargy, apathy. Only the person who is capable of being immersed in work knows the true meaning of rest. This is why at ISA centers, as I have said before, you will find many residents engaged in unstinting non-stop work. They are not working at something they enjoyed or dislike. They are not working to achieve something. It is simply single-minded, choiceless activity. They are doing it because it is needed, that's all. You will see after rigorous immersive work that there is suddenly no intention left in you to do anything. Now the real spiritual process unfolds. Only if you have known intense action will you know the bliss of inaction. Once your energies get to a boiling point, it is very easy to transform them and make your life happen in the most harmonious way possible. That is the whole purpose of Karma Yoga. This is also the science of creating a truly powerful being. This is how one who serves is created. Their power is immense, but it is not the power to rule. The power to rule is not a real power because it can be taken away at any time. The power that we are talking about here is a power that cannot be taken away. In whatever circumstance or context such a person is placed, there is only one thing they will do. Those who seek to rule can work only if they are on their throne. If they are taken off the seat, they become miserable. But those who choose to serve will be undeterred because they are not obsessed with the fruit of their action. If they are in heaven, they will do the same thing. If they are in hell, they will do the same thing. According to Buddhist lore, Gautama the Buddha said he would rather serve in hell than go to heaven because anyway he was incapable of suffering. That was his freedom. This approach releases you from attachment to the fruit of your action. Now the action will happen by itself. It will also dissolve and melt away by itself. You do not have to stop working to be liberated from action. It will happen anyway. You do not have to do anything about it. It happened. In a Jain monastery, there lived a master who was more than 80 years old. Every day he worked his heart out in the garden, a time honored part of Jain spiritual practice. He had been doing this for years. Now he had grown old and weak, but he refused to stop his work. His disciples tried to dissuade him. Do not bother with this anymore, Master, they said. We are all here, we will do it. But the old master wouldn't listen. His physical ability had weakened, but the intensity remained the same. So one day, his disciple took away his gardening tools and hid them somewhere. He hunted for them in vain. That day he did not eat. The next day again his tools were missing, so he did not eat. The third day, no tools, once more he did not eat. Now his disciples grew afraid at his refusal to eat. The next day they replaced the tool in the gardening shed. That day the old monk worked and ate. In the evening he gave his teaching, no work, no food, and that night he died. The 4 days of fasting had weakened him considerably, but his teaching was succinct and he delivered it before he died. No work, no food. Now, whenever you put such a man, heaven or hell, his action will remain the same. When you are like this, you are released from the vagaries of the external situation, from the cycles of karma. Merely closing your eyes won't achieve this. Merely running away and sitting in the mountains won't achieve this. The moment you open your eyes, the moment you return to the marketplace, reality will come and catch up with you. Karma has to be worked out, but engaging with action with great involvement and intensity without carrying a hood for it is the most effective way to work your karma out. There are various ways to do so. You could be so drunk with blissfulness that nothing matters, or you could fall so deeply in love with someone that nothing matters. Only if you are in states of bliss or love can you work intensely and still not be bothered about the result. Ninth point is the meaning of sacrifice. The term Karma Yoga is often seen as closely linked with sacrifice. In every spiritual tradition in the world, the notion of sacrifice has been seen as significant. In Sanskrit, the word yagna is often translated in English as sacrifice, but yagna usually refers in practice to certain obligations and rituals that were practiced in ancient India to appease a deity or to placate some forces of nature. However, these rituals were not a sacrifice in the true sense of the word. Giving up something for something else is commerce. Giving up something for nothing is a sacrifice. The traditional yagna had its own technology and internal logic. It was a process through which you found access to certain forces or deities and sought to enhance your capabilities. These processes are still practiced today in many parts of India. They can help create several health and material benefits. However, once you are on a spiritual path, you are not interested in small processes, minor technology, petty rituals. The very way you live becomes a yagna. This is the deepest meaning of sacrifice. You are not interested in inviting an expert to perform rituals to enable you to manipulate certain forces. Your very life process is an offering. If even a small percentage of the world population becomes meditative, many reap the benefits. A single mango tree can offer fruit to 100 people. Similarly, when your life becomes a yagna, thousands of people can reap its benefits. Many individuals have done this down the ages. At ISA, there are thousands of volunteers and practitioners who have offered their entire lives to a spiritual path with commitment and unwavering focus. Wherever they go, they transform the place in their own small way into a yagna bhumi, a land of sacrifice. Do not think of sacrifice as cheerless self-denial. When one's entire life becomes an offering, it brings its own unique joy. There is a story about an Indian ascetic who went to the United States in the last century. Someone he met there dismissively commented As an ascetic, you know nothing about life. You have not tasted wine or slept with a woman. What can you know of life's experiences? The ascetic calmly replied, I came from a land of sacrifice, and I know the bliss of sacrifice, for exceeds the pleasure of the world. I am not afraid of your pleasures, and I am not denying or denouncing them. But once you taste a deeper joy, these become childish toys, mere soaps, mere distractions. This approach was at one time deeply ingrained in the Indian family. It was not perpetuated as a teaching but as an everyday practice. It was part of the spiritual culture. In a host of different ways, a child grew up observing that the more deeply fulfillment life was about giving, not taking, about serving, not ruling. My mother, like so many other mothers, was a prime example of this. She never had to say to us, I love you, because it was so apparent in everything she did. Every morning, after ensuring that her family has eaten, she would take a part of her breakfast and go to the backyard. Here, she would feed the ants that lived there. She would never eat without feeding them. Today, modern families would be spraying the backyard with pesticide, but without any self-conscious ecological mission. It was clear to my mother that the ant had as much right to this planet as she had. Every little action in her life had become a yagna. For people who lives for people whose lives have become like this, there is no need to perform any ritual. Their lives have become an expression of love, not love as I love you and you love me, but as a basic ambience of their interiority. Now their lives are one ceaseless flow of karma yoga, an endless outpouring of their inner joy. No more is needed. So this is the end of chapter 6. So I hope you love this discussion, you enjoy this discussion and gain some perspective, some knowledge out of it. So experience your life, keep learning, keep growing. Namaskaram. Thank you.